Why do you think that the framers sent the Constitution to the states with neither an endorsement nor a condemnation? And was this a wise decision? Why? Why not?
Well, Madison gave the Constitution to Richard Henry Lee, and Richard Henry Lee decided to look at the Constitution clause by clause, and through this, he believed that he did not feel right, and he did not want the Constitution.
The New York Congress did not attach either an endorsement or an objection to the Constitution that was being submitted to the 13 states because especially Federalists especially wanted the process to be as legitimate as possible. And so if the New York Congress had either supported or gone against the ratification of the Constitution, it would have illegitimize the work of the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention, because we have to remember the Constitution under the orders that the New York Congress gave them under the Articles of Confederation was in that context illegal.
I don't believe an endorsement would have made any difference, to be totally honest, because the delegates who were at the Philadelphia Convention also went to the their respective state ratifying conventions, and their word was looked at with very high respect.
But it was appropriate, in my opinion, for the Confederation Congress to remain neutral because essentially they were the ones whose power would be replaced, and I think it would have been inappropriate for them to interject their opinions.
You talked about theoretical issues in your opening statement about the ratification process, going to conventions, social contract theory, and the participation of the people. What about political reasons? Were there any political advantages to going to specially elected conventions as opposed to the state legislatures?
Well, as John J. Fox once stated, he believed that if the Constitution was given to state legislators, then if the Constitution was given to direct election of the people, then the people would not have had it ratified because majority did not actually want it.
The Federalists realized that if they send it to the state legislatures, they would have a lower chance of ratifying the Constitution, because if they establish a national government, it would mean giving up part of the state's powers up to the national government.
Moreover, the election of delegates to these conventions gave the Federalists more of a chance to practice their persuasion on anti-Federalist delegates, because essentially they knew that they, being composed of the upper class, the more educated people, they would have the better debaters, they would have the better speakers. So the specially elected conventions did benefit them politically.
This works in the context of federalism, and in Federalist Paper number 45, Madison argues that the Supremacy Clause, Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution would not necessarily create a central government that would destroy the state's rights, because in the context of federalism, and for instance the 10th Amendment, you still have powers delegated to the state governments and jurisdiction that falls into their scope, such as education.
Let me ask you about the newspaper campaign for ratification, for and against ratification. It's an article of faith among newspaper editors today that it's unethical to publish a letter to the editor under a pseudonym or where the author's identity hasn't been confirmed. But of course, at the time of ratification, almost all of these things were published under pseudonyms. First of all, why, and does it bother you at all?
To answer the first part of your question, Hamilton, Jay, and Madison published under the name of Publius because they didn't want their independent individual reputations, which were very vastly known, to affect the arguments that they were making in the Federalist Papers.
Now, I think that it's totally appropriate, especially building off Winston's point. Alexander Hamilton was known to some as a very large extremist. So by publishing it under a pseudonym, you were able to get those ideas to the people without influencing their views because of the name of the person.
But isn't motive relevant? Isn't it relevant to know the guy's a kook? I mean, when you're assessing the validity of ideas?
Well, I don't think Alexander Hamilton was definitely a kook. He was
my word, not yours.
Yeah. But I do believe that all voices have to be heard. If you look at something like the doctrine of popular sovereignty, everyone's voice has to be heard in order for everyone to have that voice in their own government.
And seeing as how the anti-federalists, their main proponents at least, had very big names such as Richard Henry Lee and Patrick Henry, I would shy away from stating that only the Federalists used the concept of pseudonyms to their advantage. I mean, For example, you see on the anti-federalist side students such as Brutus or Cato. And I think another important factor we have to remember is the actual connotations of these names. For example, Brutus was very well known as the assassin of Julius Caesar, and I think they were trying to invoke an image of the people against the monarchy.
Why were small states like Delaware so eager to have the ratification conventions approve the proposed constitution?
Delaware was very into ratifying the Constitution due to economic reasons, and they felt that by being the first state to ratify the Constitution, they would get a federal grant.
New Jersey was also another state that was small and also ratified quickly, and the reason because of that is because they had a large state debt, and they assumed that once they ratified, the federal government would take on some of that debt.
Some of the smaller states, especially the ones that were in precarious situations, ratified unanimously. Delaware 30-0, New Jersey ratified 38-0, and Georgia ratified 26-0. And looking in particular to the case of Georgia, they were on the western border, and they were facing the Seminole and the Spanish threat. And in light of this double entendre, they realized that they would have to ratify the Constitution as quickly as possible for their own state's preservation.
Were there any congressional benefits?
Sorry?
Were there any congressional benefits?
There was the issue of federal funding, which Bernstein argues motivated some of the Delaware delegates, and by ratifying it as quickly as they did, they believed that they would be able to get more of the financial appropriations.
As for congressional benefits, the records at Connecticut are very sparse, so we unfortunately don't know exactly what happened, but there is speculation that because the Constitution, the basic structure of Congress was based on, the Connecticut Compromise proposed by Roger Sherman from the state of Connecticut, I think there is good reason to believe that that benefit given to them, the small states, including Connecticut, is part of the reason why small states ratified relatively quickly.